On a seemingly ordinary Friday afternoon in the spring of 2019, the suburb of West Dublin was shattered by a brazen act of violence. It was around 2 p.m. when a man casually stepped out of the front door of his parents' house, unaware of the impending danger. As he moved through the front garden, a white Peugeot partner van appeared, driving slowly up the street. In a flash, the van's side window rolled down, and the neighborhood was torn apart by a hail of gunfire. The man was struck multiple times in a ruthless daylight attack, collapsing instantly as the van sped away, leaving behind a scene of horror. Neighbors who witnessed the attack could only watch in shock as the man lay motionless, his life brutally snatched away in a blink of an eye. The van was later found abandoned and burnt out near a local school. As the flames devoured the vehicle, a handgun, equipped with a silencer, slipped out onto the pavement, an eerie reminder of the calculated violence that had just occurred. The victim was pronounced dead at the scene, his lifeless body transported to the city morgue for a post-mortem. It didn't take long for authorities to identify the victim as 42-year-old David Chen Lynch, a seasoned criminal with a reputation for operating under the radar. Lynch had skillfully evaded both prosecution and media attention, despite a deep-rooted involvement in organised crime. Lynch's murder was the latest chapter in a complex and long-standing gangland feud in Clondalkin, a dispute that had simmered since 2013, but had recently reignited with brutal intensity. This local conflict had also ensnared associates of notorious veteran criminal John Gilligan, whose network had been heavily involved in the West Dublin drug trade, pulling them into the crossfire of these deadly disputes. Tragically, Lynch was neither the first, nor, as feared, the last victim of this relentless and bloody gangland war. Hailing from Roller in Clondalkin, West Dublin, Wayne Whelan was a familiar figure to the Gardaí, his involvement in serious organised crime spanning more than 2 decades. His criminal career first caught the attention of law enforcement in the 1990s, when he made a name for himself as a car thief and joyrider. Whelan was part of a notoriously violent and unpredictable group known as the M50 Gang, a collection of around 20 criminals aged between 19 and 24 from the Ballyfermot, Ronanstown and Clondalkin areas. The gang earned their name for their method of operation, stealing high-powered cars and using the M50 motorway as their main route to carry out a spree of robberies across Dublin and the surrounding counties. They targeted homes, shops and petrol stations, seizing cars, cash and any valuables they could get their hands on. Equipped with radio receivers tuned to guard the frequencies, walkie-talkies and sometimes even sawn-off shotguns, the gang was well prepared for any encounter with law enforcement. But they rarely had to worry. Their high-powered BMWs and Audis easily outpaced the older, outmoded Garda Patrol and unmarked cars, making them a formidable and elusive force on Dublin streets. Whelan wasn't deeply involved with the gang and had transitioned into the drug trade by the time it dissolved, initially focusing on ecstasy and speed. He was well liked, known for his friendly, outgoing nature. Among his friends, he was seen as a happy-go-lucky big jolly guy who was generous with both his money and drugs, often sharing them during weekend gatherings. Whelan quickly advanced from dealing party drugs to handling cocaine in wholesale quantities, establishing himself as a major figure in the trade. In 2005, he was arrested in connection with one of the largest cocaine seizures of the year. The Garda National Drugs Unit raided a house in Maynooth that December, where Whelan and his gang had been operating a cocaine mixing factory. Inside, the Gardaí uncovered compressors, blenders, mixers, weighing scales, and other equipment capable of producing over €4 million worth of drugs. They seized more than €2.5 million worth of cocaine and €100,000 in cash. Whelan and his associate Martin Walsh were arrested, questioned, and charged with drug dealing. Both men were brought before a court and remanded in custody. However, Whelan filed a habeas corpus case with the High Court, which he won. The court determined that there had been a procedural error in the district court, leading to his release just 2 days before Christmas 2005. As a result, Whelan never served time for the drug offences. On May 6, 2006, the case against him collapsed, and the charges were ultimately withdrawn. The case reflected a pattern in Whelan's lifelong interactions with the law. Despite being a significant player in the drug trade in West Dublin for many years, his only convictions were for traffic violations. Although he appeared in court over 65 times during his career, he consistently received lenient outcomes, including the benefit of the Probation Act and suspended sentences, resulting in little to no time spent in prison. Whelan grew close to 2 other criminals, David Chen Lynch and Ballyfermot gang leader Mark Desmond, who would go on to become one of the most feared figures in West Dublin. Desmond, infamously known as Guinea Pig, was a suspect in 2 murders in 1999 and was also believed to be a paedophile. Whelan's decision to testify in Desmond's defence when he was charged with 4 counts of unlawful possession of firearms with intent to endanger life significantly altered public perception of him. After Desmond was released from prison in 2004, he reconnected with Whelan and Lynch. Desmond even stayed at Whelan's house in Lucan, where they often took drugs together. Senior Gardaí believed that this association marked the beginning of Whelan's downfall. Desmond was widely disliked and distrusted, and his association with Whelan led to a shift in how others viewed Whelan. He had entered a more dangerous phase of criminality, marked by escalating violence, gun crime, and drug abuse. Despite the socialising and the facade of friendship, both Whelan and Lynch were fully aware of Desmond's dangerous nature. During this time, Lynch and Whelan maintained connections with criminal gangs and drug dealers across Ballyfermot, Tallaght, and Clondalkin. Their ties to individuals involved in ongoing murderous feuds made them prime targets for the Garda's Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau and the Criminal Assets Bureau. As is often the case in organised crime, feuds erupted both within and between rival gangs in West Dublin and Tallaght. Former friends and criminal partners turned against each other, driven by personal grudges and vendettas. Whelan, Desmond, Lynch, and their fellow gangsters were all affected by the escalation in violence in the Greater Clondalkin area. On the evening of August 29, 2013, Jason J. Carroll, Whelan's friend, with whom he worked in the ecstasy and amphetamine trade, was shot in the face at his home in Cherrywood Drive in Clondalkin. The 39-year-old father of 4 was attacked on his doorstep while his daughter slept upstairs. Carroll's connections to the Kinahan Cartel, which had a network of criminal associates and hired other gangs to execute cartel-ordered attacks, made him a target. Like other Dublin criminals, Whelan was suspected of being recruited for cartel hit jobs. Carroll's murder was part of an ongoing turf war over drug trade control, which fueled further violence, including 2 additional gangland killings in 2017. Darren Nugent and John Gibson were both gunned down within a week of each other that September. However, the feud also took a tragic toll on innocent lives, most notably that of 21-year-old Dean Johnson. On August 24, 2013 at 12:20 a.m, Dean was walking home from a night out when a car pulled up and 2 men emerged. Despite Dean's attempt to flee, he was shot dead. The gunmen had intended to target a different gangland criminal who had been at the same pub as Dean that evening, but they followed the wrong person and ended up killing an innocent man. 3 years later, Mark Desmond's involvement in organised crime came back to haunt him when his so-called friends, including Wayne Whelan and David Lynch, betrayed him. In December 2016, Desmond was shot in Griffin Valley Park after he went there believing he was meeting someone he trusted. Although Whelan was arrested and interrogated about the murder, Gardaí were unable to gather enough evidence to build a case against him. As a result, neither Whelan nor David Lynch was ever charged in connection with the crime. However, they had unwittingly set the stage for their own downfall. The threat to each of their lives intensified when the brothers turned against each other. Lynch was the first to fall. On March 1, 2019 at 2:15 p.m, he was shot 4 times at close range in the head, neck, and leg, while in the front garden of his parents' house on Foxteen Avenue in Clondalkin. The getaway car, a Peugeot van, was later found burning, along with a semi-automatic pistol and silencer nearby. Another getaway car, a silver Toyota Corolla, was discovered ablaze in Lucan. Although Whelan was a suspect in Lynch's murder, the act of eliminating one rival only made him a more prominent target. Gardaí once again warned him of the danger to his life, but he ignored their security advice. Meanwhile, Whelan's drug use was spiralling out of control. Once a supplier, he'd now become a heavy user, and his increasing recklessness and carelessness reflected this decline. The drug trade in the Clondalkin area had evolved without him. The Kinahan gang had taken over, dominating the market and installing their own representative to oversee operations in the region. On the morning of September 4, 2019, Wayne Whelan had spent time at his parents' house before heading back to his own nearby around lunchtime. As he drove into his estate, his car was rammed by a white Volkswagen caddy van. A gunman emerged and fired 11 shots at Whelan while he was seated in the driver's seat, hitting him 4 times in the body, head, and arms. Limerick gun-for-hire Wayne Ryan was one of the 2 masked men in the van lying in wait for Whelan. Despite his injuries, Whelan managed to escape his car and attract the attention of neighbours. One of them brought him into their home. Panicking, he collapsed at the nearby house, seriously injured, but still alive. When Gardaí arrived, they found the hallway covered in blood. Whelan told them that both the driver and the shooter were wearing balaclavas. Sitting at the bottom of the stairs, his clothes drenched in blood, he grew weak when he tried to stand. The Gardaí helped him to lie on the floor while awaiting paramedics, who then took him to the hospital. 4 bullet fragments were extracted from Whelan's arms and chest wall, yet he survived the attack against the odds. True to his nature, a photo of him smiling and recovering in the hospital, despite the tubes and wounds, made its way onto social media. A technical examination of the scene revealed 11 bullet holes in his windscreen, 11 spent bullet casings, and fragments from 7 bullets. The white caddy, which had been set alight shortly after the shooting, was inspected by Gardaí. They discovered a severely fire-damaged handgun, its magazine, and the remnants of a silencer. Soon after, another car was found burning in Bray, followed by a third vehicle in Kilcock that evening. Gardaí observed the man leaving the area of the third burning car and jumping into an Opel Insignia. The vehicle was subsequently tracked and stopped just before leak slip. Inside, the Gardaí found 4 men and a petrol can filled with diesel oil in the boot, leading to their arrest on suspicion of arson. In 2021, those 4 men involved were sentenced to a total of 33 years. Wayne Ryan, the Limerick criminal who was the triggerman, received a 15-year sentence. The other 3, Caelan Crawford, Darren Henderson, and Charles McLean, were sentenced to 7 and 8 years respectively. The attempt on Whelan, who had grown up with McLean and once operated a car sales business with him until it closed in 2016, became a stark example of the betrayal so common in the criminal underworld. Whelan fled the country following his release from the hospital. However, he couldn't stay away from Dublin or his criminal past for long. His enemies, some of whom he had once considered friends, discovered he had returned and planned his murder. Just 2 months later, on November 18, 2019, Whelan's luck ran out. He was shot dead at Mount Andrew Rise in Lucan. His vehicle was then set on fire with his body inside. A heavy cocaine user, Whelan was first suspected by Gardaí of having gone out to meet a drug dealer. Despite still having shrapnel in his body from the previous shooting just 2 months earlier, he ventured out on a dark, damp winter night, reportedly to score cocaine. His family reported him missing, and his charred body was eventually discovered in the passenger seat of a car he had bought only 6 days before. He had been shot in the head, likely from behind, suggesting the shooter was in the back seat when Whelan was caught off guard. It took 2 days to identify the remains found in the burnt-out car as Wayne Whelan. The 42-year-old gangland criminal was so severely burned that identification was only possible through DNA, as Gardaí needed more than just medical and dental records to confirm his death as a result of organised crime. Wayne Whelan's death mirrored the dangerous criminal life he had lived. Although he was aware of the threats against him, he clearly didn't anticipate his life would end so soon, or in such a manner. Whelan got into a navy Toyota Corolla with a person or people he trusted, only to fall victim to a double cross, as so many others have before him. The following morning, 3 fire trucks were called to the scene to ensure Whelan's dignity was preserved during the removal of his body for the post-mortem. The trucks were strategically placed to block the view of the bystanders and prevent media from capturing any footage or photographs. It became apparent that Whelan's night out was not just about scoring cocaine. Given the serious murder attempt he had survived 2 months earlier, he was highly cautious and only associated with people he knew well. On that fateful evening, Whelan was sitting next to his wife Barbara Harmon when he received a call from his friend, Anthony Casserly. Casserly, who had grown up nearby and remained close friends with Whelan until his death, invited him to the pub to watch the Ireland-Denmark soccer match. At 7:30 p.m, Whelan left the house and got into a Toyota Corolla, which had been bought a few days earlier from a Circle K garage. CCTV footage captured him walking to the car and getting into the front passenger seat at 7:33 p.m. Just 9 minutes later, the Toyota was found burned out. The post-mortem revealed that Whelan had been shot dead before the car was set on fire. He had been sitting in the front passenger seat when someone in the back seat, positioned behind and to the right of him, fired 3 shots to his head. Shortly after the incident, media websites began reporting a car fire, with suspicions that someone might be dead inside. Around 2 hours later, various text messages started circulating in a WhatsApp group, raising concerns that the victim might be Whelan. Both Whelan and Casserly were members of this group. Cassidy began sending messages in the group, claiming he hadn't seen Whelan and had stayed home instead of going to the pub to watch the match. As news spread that the person in the car might be Wayne, a group of people, including Cassidy, gathered at Whelan's mother's house to offer support. Cassidy repeated to Wayne's mother that he hadn't seen him and had stayed home that evening. However, the person who drove Cassidy home that night found his behaviour suspicious, particularly as he was adamant, without any evidence, that the victim in the car was Whelan. In his statement to the Gardaí, Cassidy claimed he had initially planned to meet Whelan, but had instead stayed home. However, CCTV footage showing his Volkswagen Golf entering the Mount Andrew estate and approaching the crime scene just minutes before Whelan entered the Toyota revealed that Cassidy's account was false. This inconsistency led Gardaí to suspect that Cassidy might have been involved in Whelan's murder. Consequently, mobile phones belonging to Cassidy and his uncle, Christopher Moran, were seized for investigation. In the days leading up to the murder, Cassidy's Volkswagen had been used by his uncle. The car had been thoroughly cleaned before it was seized on November 19, and the floor mats were still damp. Both men were subsequently arrested and interviewed. It soon became evident that Moran had been the getaway driver for the hit. In 2022, Cassidy was sentenced to 9 years in prison, with the last 2 years suspended. His father, Mark Cassidy, received a 5-year suspended sentence for providing a false alibi, claiming his son was at home during the murder. In a victim impact statement, Whelan's sister, Hazel Granger, expressed her anguish, noting that the most distressing part was that her brother trusted Cassidy, who had come to their home that night while the family was desperately trying to locate Wayne. On November 6, 2015, drug dealer David Dahi Douglas was out enjoying Dublin's nightlife. A former zookeeper with IRA ties, he hopped between Northside pubs before making a fateful choice to end his night at a lap dancing club in the city centre. What seemed like a casual decision would soon set in motion of events leading to his death. That same evening, members of the Kinahan crime gang, including their leader Daniel Kinahan, were gathered at the Red Cow Hotel for a boxing event. In 2 days, Jamie Kavanagh, the son of murdered gangster Gerard Hatchet Kavanagh, was set to fight in a national stadium. At the time, tensions were sky high. The murder of Gary Hutch in Spain just weeks earlier had the Kinahans bracing for payback. The mood turned chaotic when one of Kinahan's men stepped outside for a cigarette and spotted a suspicious vehicle lurking in the parking lot. He darted back inside, spreading panic. A group of 50 Kinahan cronies scrambled for their cars and fled the scene, with Daniel Kinahan himself whisked away through a back door. Their fear wasn't unfounded. As it turned out, a gunman in the suspicious vehicle had attempted to shoot, only for his weapon to jam. But the message was clear. This was a declaration of war. The Kinahan associate who happened to step outside for a smoke that night and caused the panic was described by witnesses as Liam Bob Rowe, one of Ireland's most notorious gangsters and a trusted lieutenant of the Kinahan Cartel. In the hours after the Red Cow incident, some Kinahan gang members, including Bob Rowe, headed to Dublin's Angels nightclub on Leeson Street, hoping to shake off the earlier scare. Rowe partied into the early hours, but as he glanced across the room, his mood shifted. He spotted a face he couldn't quite place at first, but knew he'd seen before. There, on the opposite side of the club, stood Dahi Douglas, unaware that his fate was about to be sealed. Rowe quickly relayed his suspicions to his fellow gang members, claiming that Douglas was one of the men in the car during the failed hit earlier that night. With that tip, the wheels of revenge were set in motion. That fateful night at Angels nightclub sealed the destinies of Douglas and his friend Darren Kearns, who had ties with both the Hutch family and the Kinahan Cartel. Both men were quickly framed as the would-be attackers from the Red Cow incident, and by the following weekend, the secret cartel meeting had decided their fate. Within just 48 hours, Douglas was ambushed and shot multiple times while walking his dog in Cabra, but managed to survive. A month later, Kearns was fatally gunned down as he left the restaurant with his wife, also in Cabra. And by June, the Kinahan gang caught up with Douglas once more, killing him in cold blood outside his wife's shop in Dublin's south inner city. Bob Rowe's cousin, the notorious Fat Freddie Thompson, would later be sentenced to life for Douglas's murder. The deaths of both men would later prove to be a tragic case of mistaken identity. CCTV footage revealed that neither Douglas nor Kearns had been at the Red Cow that night, nor did they have any involvement in the Kinahan-Hutch feud. The brutal killings underscored the Kinahan gang's escalating paranoia and ruthlessness at the time, and the infamous Regency shooting hadn't even taken place yet. Bob Rowe, the first cousin of gangster brothers Liam and the eventually murdered David Byrne, had been entrenched in organised crime for most of his adult life. Known for his permanent tan, striking blue eyes, and bright white smile, the Drimnagh native first came into public attention during the infamous and deadly Crumlin-Drimnagh feud. This feud ignited after a police raid in March 2000 at the Holiday Inn on Pierce Street, Dublin, where officers discovered a drug operation in full swing. 3 members from Crumlin and Drimnagh were caught cutting cocaine, and a haul of 2 kilos of cocaine and 49,000 ecstasy tablets was seized. The 3 lads were arrested, but one, a 20-year-old named Declan Gavin, was released without charges after just 2 days. Gavin's release stirred suspicion within the gang, though he'd just stepped out of the hotel room as the raid occurred and wasn't caught red-handed. Some in the gang suspected he was an informant, a rat, given leniency for cooperation. The suspicion only grew as his 2 companions faced serious charges for possession with intent to sell, leading to lengthy prison sentences. But despite the lack of evidence, the labelling of Declan Gavin as an informant caused a deep rift within the group. This split led to the formation of 2 rival factions, with Notorious Gangster Brian Rattigan leading one side and Fat Freddie Thompson, Bob Rowe's cousin, leading the other. The feud's first fatal blow came the following year when Declan Gavin, a close friend of Thompson's, was fatally stabbed outside an Abracadabra restaurant in Crumlin. His murder triggered a series of tit-for-tat shootings, claiming the lives of 15 men over time. At Gavin's murder trial, David Byrne, deeply involved in the feud on his cousin Thompson's side, testified against Brian Rattigan, leading to Rattigan's eventual conviction for Gavin's death. But David wasn't Thompson's only cousin caught up in the bloody conflict. Bob Rowe also played a major role. He was suspected in 3 feud-related shootings, including 1 murder. Gardaí believed Rowe was part of the gang responsible for murdering Joe Rattigan, the younger brother of Brian Rattigan, in revenge for Declan Gavin's death. In July 2002, 18-year-old Joe was fatally shot by a 2-man hit squad on Cooley Road in Drimnagh, and detectives suspect that Rowe was one of the gunmen. The case remains unsolved, with no charges ever filed. That same year, Brian Rattigan himself narrowly escaped a similar fate. A 4-man hit squad attempted to kill him at a house in South Dublin, shooting him at close range. Miraculously, Rattigan survived by leaping out of an upper-floor window. Gardaí suspect Rowe was part of that team, believed to be one of 3 gunmen who stormed the house while a 4th man drove the getaway car. No one has ever been charged for this attack either. Of the other suspects, 2 are now deceased, and 1 is serving time in prison. The deceased suspects were Paddy Doyle and Darren Gagan. Doyle, notorious for at least 2 murders in his own town, fled to Spain in 2005, aligning himself with the Kinahan cartel. However, the cartel's trust in him soured over time, and they let Gary Hutch, who was still a Kinahan associate at the time, help orchestrate Doyle's murder, even accompanying him in the car when Doyle was shot outside Estepona. Ironically, Hutch himself later became a target of the Kinahans, meeting his end near Estepona in September 2015. Darren Gagan, deeply entangled in the Crumlin feud, was killed by his own faction in Dublin the same year Paddy Doyle fled the country. Rowe was also suspected in an attempted murder in Dublin's Coombe district in June 2002, a month before Joe Rattigan was killed. However, the target survived and Rowe was never charged. In 2007, he was arrested after allegedly threatening to kill a bouncer at a pub on Dame Street. 2 years later, he was fined €250 for obstructing a Garda drug search. In March 2012, Rowe faced more serious allegations. Arrested in the UK alongside Liam Byrne and their close associate Sean McGovern, who would later be injured in the Regency Hotel attack, Rowe was questioned about death threats, blackmail, and possession of burglary tools. The trio allegedly tried to intimidate a businessman to collect a €60,000 debt, although no charges were ultimately brought against them. Later that year, Rowe served a 4-month jail sentence after Gardaí raided his apartment and found stolen designer handbags. The police had expected to find firearms, but instead uncovered the stolen items. Rowe also unsuccessfully tried to reclaim 2 Rolex watches, worth nearly €50,000, that were seized in a separate raid for firearms at a property in Crumlin. Initially a mere foot soldier, Rowe quickly rose through the cartel's ranks, gaining enough influence to avoid direct involvement in shootings. In August 2016, Rowe was again arrested, this time in a money laundering investigation tied to the cartel. But again he was released without charge, slipping the net once more. However, 2 years later, he became one of the central figures in a cab ruling. He was identified as a senior member of the Bern Organised Crime Group, BOCG, in a successful cab application to the High Court, which resulted in the seizure of approximately €1.5 million worth of assets. These assets were found to have been purchased with the proceeds of crime from 11 BOCG members. With ties to international criminal networks in the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands, the BOCG was deeply involved in drug trafficking and violent crime, and was part of the broader Kinahan cartel. For years, Rowe, alongside Liam Byrne, who was still at large at the time, and Sean McGovern, was considered a key figure in the Kinahan logistics team in Ireland. In court, he was recognised as a trusted lieutenant and vital collaborator to Liam Byrne, the kingpin who ran a major local crime network and oversaw Daniel Kinahan's operations across Ireland and Europe. By then, the deadly nature of the Kinahan-Hutch feud was undeniable. The conflict escalated dramatically in February 2016 when David Byrne was shot dead at the Regency Hotel. Rowe, David's first cousin, was present during the shooting and was seen outside the hotel with Liam Byrne while David's lifeless body lay in a pool of blood at the hotel's reception. Meanwhile, the Criminal Assets Bureau were hot on their tails. Eventually, after years of investigation, the evidence it collected provided a rare and detailed look into the gang's structure, finances, and operations in Ireland. As a result, the gang lost 29 high-end luxury cars, 3 electric bikes, a dune buggy, 4 Rolex and Breitling watches, 2 platinum and gold diamond rings, more than €26,000 in cash, and 2 houses in Dublin valued at over €500,000. However, the case uncovered more than just the gang members. It exposed their associates, partners, and even their parents, along with their lavish lifestyles, fraudulent businesses, money laundering schemes, international connections, and the millions they had amassed from criminal activities. Many of the top gang leaders behind the Irish drugs trade live abroad, and for good reason. As long as they are tax domiciled in other jurisdictions and have no assets in Ireland, they remain beyond the reach of CAB. The Kinahan gang is a prime example. Its leaders, Christy Kinahan and his sons Daniel and Christopher, have been tax domiciled overseas, initially in Spain and later in Dubai. But because they don't reside in Ireland, they rely on trusted individuals living in the Republic to manage their operations there. Someone needs to oversee the drug smuggling and distribution in Ireland, and that's where their logistics team comes in. These team members are well compensated to stay in Ireland for extended periods, sacrificing the relative security of life abroad. In doing so, they take on the risk of being targeted by CAB, a risk the Kinahans are unwilling to face themselves, which is why they outsource it. This risk of being the ones on the ground in Ireland, managing the drug operation, became all too real for Liam Byrne, Bob Rowe, and Sean McGovern during the 2018 CAB case. Their primary target was Liam Byrne, who was considered the leader of the Bern Organised Crime Group, BOCG, with strong connections to international criminal networks in the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands. The High Court ruled that the Bern Organised Crime Gang set up businesses that appeared legitimate, but were actually used as fronts for laundering money earned through criminal activities. This was achieved through a network of car dealerships and other businesses operating in both Ireland and the UK. In June 2013, Liam Byrne established LS Active Car Sales at the Bluebell Business Park in Dublin. His trusted associate, Sean McGovern, was made a director of the company. However, LS Active did not function like a typical car sales business, as the majority of its cars were not for sale. Instead, they were reserved for the exclusive use of gang members, their partners, associates, and family members. In the 29 days leading up to the CAB raid in March 2016, not a single car was sold. Meanwhile, Byrne, Rowe, and McGovern were deeply involved in the cartel's illicit business, paying others to transport and sell drugs in Ireland, effectively reducing their own risk of being caught with large quantities of drugs. However, just as they outsourced the risk of drug possession, the Kinahan gang also outsourced to them the risk of being targeted by CAB. By remaining in Ireland to oversee the receipt and distribution of drug shipments to other gangs, they took on the risk that the Kinahans themselves were unwilling to face. Despite its international ties, The Byrne organised crime group is deeply rooted in tight-knit family and local connections in Dublin's South City. The group was so closely bonded that its members all lived near each other in a housing estate around Kildare Road in Crumlin. This area, described by the Criminal Assets Bureau as the stronghold out of which the BOCG operates, was at the very heart of their operations. Though he kept a low profile in recent years, Rowe was regarded as one of the most senior members of the cartel in Ireland. He was a constant companion to Liam Byrne and played a key role in the gang before Byrne fled the country and was later imprisoned in the UK, where he's just been sentenced to 5 years on weapons charges. His extravagant lifestyle was laid bare in court, highlighting several lavish holidays to luxury destinations. Between July 2015 and June 2016, he travelled frequently to places such as the UK, US and Spain. He also attended the Conor McGregor vs Chad Mendes fight at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, and later travelled to Dubai following the Regency Hotel shooting. Interestingly, none of these flights or tickets were paid for through an account in Rowe's name. Additionally, Rowe could not account for a bank deposit of €294,000, nor could he explain how he came to own 11 vehicles, most of them high-end luxury cars. As part of the cab investigation, CAB did manage to seize an Audi A5 and a Kawasaki motorbike worth €38,000 from Rowe. Bob Rowe was the last known member of the Byrne gang understood to be still in Dublin. Unlike many of his criminal associates, he never fled the country when his gang's feud with the Hutch mob and associated Garda crackdown began. However, the Taliban gangster lived under severe pressure from his own associates in the cartel over a massive amount of money owed to the hierarchy of the gang, who were believed to be living in the Middle East to avoid the sanctions imposed on them by the US government. In 2023, Rowe once again caught the attention of the Gardaí when he appeared to be involved in a violent campaign of intimidation against innocent families in Dublin, following an assault at a house party. A 20-year-old woman who had no criminal convictions was severely injured when a canister of nitrous oxide, also known as laughing gas, was thrown at her during the party. She suffered serious facial injuries and had to be hospitalised. Rowe was believed to be one of the individuals involved in a subsequent campaign against the families of 2 young men whom they blamed for the assault. This campaign involved extortionate demands for up to €60,000, alongside death threats and threats to burn down their homes and vehicles. However, in May 2024, Rowe received devastating news. He'd been diagnosed with cancer. 3 months later, he was admitted to St James Hospital for treatment of a blood disorder and sepsis. Ultimately, after falling critically ill, he passed away a few days later. Several of his family members were by his side when he died, and tributes to the cartel lieutenant have since been shared online by family and friends. Rowe's funeral was held in Drimnagh, Dublin, and it was a stark contrast to the lavish display of wealth and power that marked his cousin David Byrne's funeral in February 2016, just days after he was shot dead at the Regency Hotel. There were no motorbikes leading the procession, nor were gang members dressed in expensive matching suits. No Garda tactical units or bomb-sniffing dogs were called in to prevent further violence. His coffin was adorned with floral tributes and photos of his cousin Liam Byrne and friend Sean McGovern, both of whom, unsurprisingly, were absent. This stark difference in the 2 funeral services highlights the dramatic shift in the gang's fortunes over the past decade. On a seemingly ordinary Sunday evening in September 2010, drug dealer Sean Winters was relaxing in his Port Marnock apartment with friends when at about 10 p.m. his mobile phone rang. After a brief conversation, Winters casually told his friends he'd be stepping out for a few minutes to meet someone. But what followed was anything but casual. According to neighbours, a heated argument soon erupted outside. In the blink of an eye, Winters' body collapsed on the pavement. He'd been shot twice in the back of the head. The gunman, dressed in a dark jacket with the hood pulled up, swiftly jumped into the front seat of a silver Volkswagen Passat, speeding off into the night. Half an hour later, the car was found torched in Corlock. Winters was pronounced dead at the scene. Within hours of this cold-blooded execution, 6 suspects were arrested in a house in Donemead, and 4 others were detained after Gardaí intercepted a suspicious car. All were questioned, but later released without charge. Among the suspects was none other than real IRA leader Alan Ryan. In the heart of Dublin, where the shadows of mystery loom large and the echoes of conflict still resonate, two brothers emerged as figures of both fear and fascination. Alan Vincent Ryan, born into a staunchly Republican family, left an indelible mark on Ireland's criminal landscape. Their lives embodying the often blurred line between idealism and violence. Born in North Dublin during the twilight years of the Troubles, Alan and Vincent Ryan were raised in an environment steeped in Republican ideology. From an early age, they were immersed in stories of resistance against British rule and the ongoing struggle for a united Ireland. But as they came of age, the world around them was changing. The Provisional IRA had laid down arms, and the Good Friday Agreement promised a new era of peace. For many, it was a time of hope and reconciliation. For others, like the Ryans, it was a call to arms. Alan Ryan, the older of the two, was quick to answer that call. By his late teens, he'd already joined the Fine Gael, the youth wing of the Republican movement. It was here that Alan began to shape his identity as a hardline Republican, one who saw the peace process not as progress, but as a betrayal of the cause. The former IRA member, speaking anonymously, reflected on those turbulent times, suggesting that the peace process had created a vacuum which dissidents and diehards quickly tried to fill. It was an opportunity that Alan Ryan seized with both hands. He first came to the attention of the Irish police in 1999, when authorities uncovered a real IRA weapons training camp in an underground bunker in County Meath. Alan was one of 10 people arrested in the raid. 6 months later, he pleaded guilty to receiving training in the use of firearms at the camp and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Alan was just 19 years old at the time. After his release from prison, Alan became heavily involved in extorting and threatening drug dealers. By the mid-2000s, he climbed the ranks of the dissident Republican movement, establishing himself as a key figure in what became known as the Real IRA. He forged strong connections with dissident activists in the Northwest and maintained close ties between his Dublin-based gang and the leadership of the Derry faction. This relationship strengthened, particularly after a major conflict with the Real IRA's commander in Dublin, during which Ryan reportedly used his muscle to support the Derry group's operations. Alan's vision of Republican struggle was far removed from the political maneuverings of Sinn Féin or the armed campaigns of the past. Instead, he saw a new battlefield in the streets of Dublin, one where control of the criminal underworld was the prize. His modus operandi was as simple as it was brutal. He and his group would extort money from drug gangs and businessmen across the city and demand protection money from firms. His faction would soon get involved in feuds with major gangland criminals, and his group is thought to have been responsible for at least 3 murders in Dublin and many more violent acts. They targeted drug dealers operating in North Dublin, demanding protection money and using violence to enforce their will. To Alan, this was not mere criminality, but a continuation of the Republican struggle by other means. He saw himself as a Robin Hood figure, extorting from the criminal elements to fund the cause. But the reality was far from heroic. Alan's reign of terror left a trail of broken bodies and shattered lives. One particularly gruesome incident saw a well-known drug dealer have his fingers chopped off in a park in Drumcondra, a brutal message to those who would defy the Real IRA's demands. As Alan's power grew, so did his public profile. Unlike the secretive IRA members of the past, Alan and his crew embraced a flashy, ostentatious lifestyle. The Players' Lounge, a local pub in Fairview owned by the father of soccer star Anthony Stokes, became their de facto headquarters. A place where young women flocked and the beer flowed freely, even if Alan himself was known to abstain. In July 2010, the pub turned into a scene of horror when notorious gun-for-hire John Wilson opened fire and shot 3 men. Wilson was sent by veteran criminal Sean Hunt, an ex-IRA chief who had amassed millions through various illegal activities, including smuggling cigarettes. Hunt clashed with Alan when he'd begun extorting protection money from him. However, John Wilson messed up, and instead of killing the target, he nearly killed 3 innocent men. Meanwhile, the flashy lifestyle Alan and his crew displayed was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it attracted a new generation of young men to the cause, drawn to the promise of power, money, and a sense of belonging. On the other, it made Alan and his associates easy targets for both law enforcement and rival gangs. In the meantime, Vincent Ryan, known as Vinny, was following in his brother's footsteps. Younger and perhaps more impressionable, Vinny idolized Alan and soon found himself deeply embedded in the Rio IRA's activities. Where Alan was the strategist and leader, Vinny was the soldier, the enforcer. The brothers' rise to power did not go unchallenged. Their extortion racket brought them into direct conflict with established criminal gangs, most notably the increasingly powerful Kinahan Cartel. The streets of Dublin became a battleground, with tit-for-tat killings and assassination attempts becoming all too common. The brothers are believed to have targeted convicted drug dealer Eamon Kelly and Brian O'Reilly, both close rivals of the notorious fingerless gang leader Eamon Adon Dunn, who was shot dead in April 2010 after his own people turned against him. Both men, who were told to pay up or be attacked, survived. However, one of the most high-profile incidents occurred in September 2011, the year after the first murder Ryan's group is thought to have been responsible for, that of Sean Winters. In September 2011, Michael the Panda Kelly was gunned down in broad daylight on Marsfield Avenue in Clongriffin. Kelly, also known as Mika, a well-known drug dealer, had reportedly refused to pay protection money to the Ryan brothers. His murder was a statement of intent from the Rio IRA: pay up or face the consequences. The killing of Kelly would prove to be a turning point. It brought increased police scrutiny and, more dangerously, marked the Ryan brothers as targets for some of Dublin's most dangerous criminals. The response came swiftly and brutally. On a Monday afternoon in September 2012, Alan Ryan was on his way to visit some family at a house in the area close to his own. As he was walking along Grange Lodge Avenue with two friends, a gunman pulled up behind him. After shooting Alan in the back and legs with a 9mm handgun, the gunman stepped up to Alan's body on the ground and shot him in the head. Alan Ryan died instantly, his life ending on the very streets he had sought to control. The gunman then shot one of the others in the leg before escaping in a silver Volvo car, which was later found burnt out in a nearby graveyard. Within hours of his murder, the Derry branch of the 32 County Sovereignty Movement, which is seen as the political wing of the Rio IRA, paid tribute to Ryan on a website. Alan's funeral was a spectacle that shocked the nation. Hundreds of mourners, many dressed in paramilitary uniform, escorted his coffin through the streets of Dublin. The men's attire included green military-style jumpers and combat trousers, along with scarves covering their faces, dark sunglasses, and black berets. A volley of shots was fired over the coffin, a traditional Republican salute that seemed jarringly out of place in 21st century Ireland. The show of strength was both a final tribute to Alan and a warning to his enemies. The Rio IRA was not finished. At the time of his death, Alan was facing a charge of demanding money with menaces from a Dublin publican. Gardaí were worried about the fact that Republican groups don't tend to forget when members of their organisation have been shot and killed, particularly by drug gangs or violent gangland criminals. In February 2013, two individuals suspected of involvement in Alan's murder were arrested when police stopped their car in Enniskillen. The suspects were Pascal Kelly and Jonathan Gill, also known as Mr. Big. During a search of an apartment at Porter Wharf, of which they held the keys, authorities discovered €65,826 and £2,669 in cash, along with 24 mobile phones. Interestingly, the same apartment complex housed 3 PSNI officers, triggering a significant security concern. Among the items seized was a passport with Kelly's photograph, but under the name Brendan Duffy, the alias he had given during his arrest. When questioned, both suspects responded with no comment. Although their bail was initially denied, they were never formally charged with the murder of Alan. For Vinny Ryan, his brother's death was both a personal tragedy and a call to arms. He stepped up to fill the void left by Alan, determined to continue the fight. But the landscape had shifted. The Rio IRA, already a fractured organisation, was further weakened by internal power struggles and the increasing pressure from both law enforcement and rival gangs. Vinny found himself caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse. He was arrested and charged in connection with firearms offences related to the murder of Michael Kelly, though he was eventually acquitted due to issues with DNA evidence. But the acquittal did little to ease the pressure on him. The next few years were a blur of violence and retribution. The Rio IRA, under Vinny's leadership, continued to clash with drug gangs and carry out acts of violence, only that they were fighting a losing battle. The old alliances were crumbling, and the protection once offered by their Republican credentials was wearing thin. In February 2016, the simmering tensions in Dublin's underworld exploded into all-out war, the notorious Kinahan-Hutch feud. The Regency Hotel attack, a brazen assault carried out by Hutch-aligned gunmen disguised as Garda officers, left Kinahan associate David Byrne dead and sent shockwaves through the criminal landscape. While not directly involved, Vinnie Ryan's name was whispered in connection with the attack, further painting a target on his back. Just weeks later, on February 29, 2016, Vinnie Ryan's luck ran out. At 3:15 p.m, he was sitting alone in his white Volkswagen Golf outside his partner's home in Finglas. He'd just dropped off his partner Kelly and their 5-week-old daughter when a silver 5-door Volkswagen Golf with alloy wheels pulled up alongside and discharged a number of shots into the vehicle. In a meticulously planned attack, at least 13 shots were fired, one of which struck Vinnie in the head. He later died in the hospital. The getaway car was found burnt out. It was the second time in a few months that Vinnie had been targeted. In October the previous year, he suffered serious but non-life-threatening facial injuries after being approached by a man with a knife. The murder of Vinnie Ryan marked the end of an era. The Rio IRA, once a feared force on Dublin's streets, was now a shadow of his former self. The Ryan brothers, who had lived by the sword, had ultimately died by it. But the story doesn't end there. The aftermath of the Ryan brothers' reign of terror continues to reverberate through Dublin's criminal world. Their deaths left a power vacuum that was quickly filled by other criminal elements, leading to further violence and instability. The investigation into Vinnie Ryan's murder would uncover a complex web of criminal connections. Two men, Paul O'Byrne and Jeffrey Morrow, would eventually be convicted for their roles in facilitating the murder, having provided and then destroyed the stolen Volkswagen Golf used in the shooting. The trial of O'Byrne and Morrow shed light on the intricate planning that went into Vinnie's assassination. The stolen Volkswagen Golf, meticulously tracked through CCTV footage and forensic analysis, became a crucial piece of evidence. The car's destruction was intended to erase any trace of the perpetrators, yet the evidence left behind was enough to lead authorities to those responsible. In the years following the Ryan brothers' deaths, the criminal landscape of Dublin continued to evolve. The power vacuum left by their demise was quickly filled by other players, most notably the ascendant Kinahan Cartel. The ongoing feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs would eclipse the violence of the Ryan era, bringing unprecedented levels of bloodshed to the streets of Dublin. One figure who emerged as a key player in this new era was the enigmatic criminal Jonathan Gill, known only as Mr. Big. Believed to have been involved in Alan Ryan's murder, his influence grew in the aftermath of the Ryan brothers' deaths. Gill's ability to navigate the complex alliances and enmities of Dublin's underworld made him a formidable force. Sources close to the investigation revealed that he had cultivated connections with both the Kinahan Cartel and other criminal groups. His opportunistic approach to alliances allowed him to thrive in the chaos that followed the Ryan brothers' demise. The rise of figures like Mr. Big highlighted the shifting nature of organised crime in Ireland. The old structures, based on paramilitary organisations and rigid hierarchies, were giving way to more fluid, opportunistic criminal networks. This new landscape proved challenging for law enforcement, requiring new strategies and approaches. Recently, a number of online tributes have been posted to commemorate the 12th anniversary of Alan Ryan's death. The killing of the Rio IRA leader in September 2012 has been described as arguably the most significant gangland killing in the past decade. On the evening of April 1st, 2020, two men approached a flat above a Tesco store on University Road in South Belfast, while a third man keeps his distance, watching intently. Upon opening the front door, the flat's occupant unknowingly reveals himself to the observer. 3 days later, under the midday sun, the occupant's life is cut short in a hail of bullets outside a house on Etna Drive, Ardoyne, in North Belfast. The gunman struck swiftly and methodically, leaving him no chance to escape. As soon as the man entered the hallway of the house, his attacker burst in through the back. He tried to flee and bolted for the front door, but as bullets relentlessly pierced his skull, he slumped to the ground beside a garden gate, fatally injured. It turned out that the man who got shot was 36-year-old Dublin criminal Robbie Lawler. Until this day, the murder continues to be the subject of a major police inquiry, with the circumstances surrounding the assassination highlighting an extraordinary merging of North and South criminals, reshaping the face of Ireland's gangland. In this video, we'll delve into the full story of the rise and brutal fall of one of Ireland's most notorious crime bosses. Everybody in Ireland knows the name Robbie Lawler, but who was he, and how did he become one of the most feared criminals in the country? Born in 1986, Lawler grew up in Darndale, a stark and desolate place during the 80s, especially amidst the turmoil of the Irish hunger strike. The north side of Dublin, where he was raised, was marred by poverty and high unemployment. As a teenager, he got involved in petty crime and dropped out of school at 16. Desperate for money, he turned to selling drugs, rapidly ascending through the ranks of Dublin's criminal underworld. His ruthless ambition and cunning quickly made him a formidable figure in the city's dark underbelly. Originally from Dublin but seeking refuge in County Meath, Robbie Lawler quickly became a notorious figure in the perilous world of organised crime, especially amid the violent Drogheda feud. With over 100 convictions, he was a constant blip on the police radar, earning countless enemies with his ruthless and violent nature. Known for his brutality, Lawler was involved in numerous violent crimes, including armed robberies. His criminal reach extended beyond Ireland, with ties to drug trafficking operations in the UK and Spain. Though implicated in several high-profile murders in Ireland, he evaded conviction for these crimes, further enhancing his notorious reputation. Lawler's infamy grew as he became one of Ireland's most wanted men. Despite being arrested multiple times, he skillfully avoided lengthy prison sentences. His ability to elude justice only solidified his fearsome legend in the criminal underworld. In 2005, Robbie Lawler was believed to be connected to his first documented murder, that of drug dealer Mark Byrne. The two had clashed while incarcerated in Mountjoy prison. Shortly after Byrne's temporary release, he was gunned down on a busy street, a brazen act that marked the beginning of Lawler's reputation for brutal vengeance. Although arrested for the murder, Lawler was never charged due to insufficient evidence. 3 years later, Lawler was arrested again, this time for a shocking gun attack on a man minding a baby while sitting in a friend's car. A gunman approached the vehicle and fired 5 shots through the driver's side window, leaving the man in critical condition and injuring the baby. Lawler, suspected to be the gunman, appeared to be driven by a personal vendetta, possibly with racist elements involved. Yet again he managed to evade charges, slipping through the cracks of the justice system. Then, in 2009, another notorious gangland figure, David Fred Lynch, was found gunned down in North Dublin. On his 26th birthday, his lifeless body was discovered in a field by a passerby walking his dog. Law enforcement believed Robbie Lawler, then only 24, had targeted Lynch after a personal dispute. Lynch, known as an associate of leaders from a rival faction, had received numerous threats before his death. It is believed that Lynch was lured to the field after receiving a phone call asking him to meet. The violence didn't stop there. Just a year later, Lawler was implicated in the killing of small-time criminal Noel Deans, who owed substantial amounts of money for cannabis. Although no one was charged, authorities suspected Lawler was paid to execute the hit. In a chilling display of cold-heartedness, Lawler reportedly drank tea with Dean's heartbroken mother just hours after killing her son, showcasing his ruthless nature. Following this heinous act, Lawler fled the country and embarked on a trip around the world, evading justice once more. A couple of years later in 2017, the notorious Drogheda feud erupted, when a drug gang led by Owen Maguire splintered into 2 factions after 2 ambitious young members decided to strike out on their own. This new anti-Maguire faction received support from Lawler's brother-in-law, seasoned criminal Richard Carberry. Despite growing up with prominent gangland figures like Mr. Big, Lawler was aligned with the rival faction against Maguire. However, he was more of a lone wolf, operating as a freelance hitman in his final years. Lawler's list of enemies was extensive. He became a target not only for Maguire, but also for Mr. Big, with whom he had a bit of falling out over money, turning them into sworn adversaries. In February 2018, Lawler emerged as the prime suspect in the murder of Kenneth Finn, Mr. Big's right-hand man, further entrenching himself in the violent underworld. Around that time, the Drogheda feud escalated into a wave of violence, including stabbings and car bombings. In July 2018, it's believed Lawler personally pulled the trigger on his rival, mob boss Owen Maguire, shooting him multiple times and leaving him paralysed. Just an hour after the attempted murder of Maguire, Lawler was stopped by the Gardaí in North Louth for speeding with a flat tyre. He was found stripped to his underwear and doused in petrol, presumably to eliminate any traces of gun residue or DNA. This bizarre and desperate act highlighted the lengths Lawler would go to evade capture and maintain his ruthless grip on the underworld. Meanwhile, Robbie Lawler's personal life was in turmoil. After returning from his trip in 2017, he discovered the mother of his 2 children had started a new relationship. Furious, Lawler embarked on a campaign of threats and intimidation, which culminated in the assault of his ex-girlfriend and the attempted murder of her new mother-in-law in May 2018. This led to his arrest and imprisonment. While Lawler was behind bars, his brother-in-law Richard Carberry was shot in a retaliatory hit in November 2019, just days before he was set to move to the UK. Carberry's wife and daughter tried to assist him until paramedics arrived, but he succumbed to his injuries at the scene. Lawler's time in prison had been far from peaceful. Not only did he lose his brother-in-law, he also crossed paths with one of his arch-rivals, Cornelius Price, who aligned with Maguire. In December 2019, Robbie Lawler was unexpectedly released from prison as all charges, including assault and attempted murder, were dropped. Fueled by a thirst for revenge for his brother-in-law Carberry's murder and aware that there was a bounty on his own head, Lawler re-entered the violent fray with a vengeance. The situation intensified further when rival gang boss Cornelius Price, who died in 2023, was also freed from prison a few months later. Upon his release, Lawler received a stark warning from the Gardaí. His life was in grave danger. However, warnings could not shield him from the numerous enemies he had made. Deeply entangled in the Drogheda feud, Lawler's return only served to inflame the already volatile conflict. With his life under threat from major figures in Drogheda and fears of a looming war with call-up mobster Mr. Big, Lawler's release put the Gardaí on high alert. Secret recordings from his time in prison revealed that Lawler believed that Mr. Big was behind Carberry's shooting. By the time Lawler was released, Mr. Big and Cornelius Price had joined forces. Lawler was clearly losing control, and most critically, respect, which likely fueled his paranoia. Despite the serious threats against his life from key players in the Drogheda feud, Lawler was determined to seek revenge for Carberry's murder, blaming Price for the killing. Days after his release, Lawler faced an incident as he left the gym. He was mugged by younger associates of a rival gang, including 17-year-old Keane Woods. They snatched his gym bag and stole his flip-flops, later taunting Lawler by posting pictures and a TikTok video wearing them. The video creator is believed to be an associate of David Fred Lynch, the man Lawler allegedly gunned down in 2009. In January 2020, Lawler took the feud to new heights with the brutal murder of one of the teenagers involved in that gym bag incident, Keane Woods. Woods was lured to a house where he was killed and dismembered. His remains were discovered at different locations on various dates, along with the flip-flops stolen from Lawler, serving as a grim message to his enemies. It is believed that Lawler and his gang took King to a house in Rathmullen and tortured him. Woods' murder, one of the most shocking cases in Irish history, changed everything, and the fallout was immense. The youngster was believed to be a member of the rival gang led by figures like Cornelius Price. He was also the godson of Owen Maguire, who had been left paralysed from the waist down after being shot 6 times by Lawler in 2018. Lawler held both Price and Maguire responsible for the murder of his brother-in-law, Richard Carberry. Additionally, Lawler knew that Price was fond of Woods. Lawler allegedly planned to deliver some of the teenagers' remains on Price's doorstep, but the deliverers got spooked by Gardaí. Eventually, remains were dropped near the home of Mr. Big. The killing is regarded as a message to the rival Maguire faction, to make sure they would know Robbie Lawler shouldn't be messed with. The killing of Keane infuriated Price and his allies due to its brutality. Upon his release from jail in February 2020, amidst the height of the Drogheda feud, Price escaped to the UK, but vowed to exact revenge on Lawler and eliminate him. Throughout 2020, the threats against Lawler escalated significantly. In search of safety, he fled to Northern Ireland, unaware that this decision would ultimately lead to his tragic death. Taking shelter above a Tesco store on University Road in South Belfast, Lawler's final refuge turned into a fatal ambush. In April, the inevitable happened. 36-year-old Lawler was fatally shot in broad daylight in North Belfast. Allegedly, Lawler had gone to the house on Edna Drive expecting to collect money. Upon entering the front door, a gunman entered through the back, shooting Lawler in the front yard. Days prior to the murder, on the evening of April 1st, 3 members of the infamous McCarthy Dundon gang visited Lawler's apartment. Jared Dundon and Quincy Bramble approached Lawler's flat and lured him to the door, while John Dundon's 17-year-old son Levi Keane remained discreetly out of sight. Keane observed Lawler as he unsuspectingly answered the door. Later accounts suggested this setup was to ensure Lawler was identifiable to the assailant, possibly Keane himself. This theory was supported by the belief the trio was part of a hit team, though the PSNI reported finding no evidence linking them to Lawler's death through CCTV checks. Following the shooting, the trio was apprehended in a vehicle near the murder site, but later released without charges, as the PSNI claimed they didn't find any evidence linking them to the actual killing. The release caused significant controversy because Irish investigators strongly suspected the Dundon group to be involved in the assassination. As far as the suspicion of the Dundons go, it wasn't just that trio that had gained the attention of authorities. Although they were freed after being questioned, Gardaí had also witnessed a handover of cash to McCarthy Dundon gang members from Limerick shortly after Lawler was murdered. Gardaí believed this €50,000 transaction was payment for their role in luring Lawler to the scene. According to reports, Lawler was under the protection of the Dundons during his time in prison. He supposedly paid them for security against his rival Cornelius Price, and they reportedly offered to continue protecting him after his release. However, the witness payment indicates an alleged betrayal, suggesting they double-crossed Lawler in an epic way. The connection between the Dundons and Cornelius Price appears strong. They were later arrested in the UK for an extortion scheme that led to Jared Dundon receiving a 15-year prison sentence. Other details surrounding Lawler's death remain obscure. His killing has been characterised as a gangland-style execution, and there are more individuals who may well be connected to Lawler's murder. As investigations progressed, another suspect was apprehended and interrogated. Warren Crossan, a known drug dealer, was suspected of providing the getaway vehicle used after the assassination. Crossan was the son of Tommy Crossan, a dissident Republican leader who was previously murdered. Approximately 2 months after Lawler's killing, Warren Crossan himself was fatally shot at his mother's house in Crumlin. It's speculated that this was a retaliatory strike linked to Lawler's death. Interestingly, Crossan's name surfaced in connection with the earlier mentioned extortion scheme that led to the arrests of Dundon and Price in the UK. Orchestrated by Jared Dundon, the motive allegedly revolved around money owed to Warren Crossan. The twist in this grim narrative, however, is that Crossan had already been killed before the extortion occurred, complicating the investigation with its intricate connections. Later, 2 more individuals came into focus in Lawler's case. In December 2020, Patrick Tier from Belfast and Adrian Holland from Derry were charged in connection with the murder, based on vehicle plate recognition and cell site analysis. While neither is suspected of being the actual shooters, they're accused of involvement in a joint enterprise with others. Holland owned the house on Etna Drive where the murder occurred, and Tier allegedly met with Sligo-based gangster Barry Young in a hotel just weeks before the killing. Barry Young is a notorious drug trafficker, currently serving an 11-year sentence for drug dealing. Over a criminal career spanning 2 decades, he emerged as one of the country's leading drug suppliers, eventually taking control of a gang in the west of Ireland. He played a pivotal role in the drug trade across Northern Ireland, suspected of supplying cocaine and cannabis to various gangs in Belfast and border areas. According to police, it was during that hotel meeting with Young that Lawler's execution was commissioned on behalf of a major gangland alliance of Mr. Big, Owen Maguire, and Cornelius Price, and orchestrated through intricate prison connections. In May 2024, the arrest of an associate of Barry Young in Liverpool marked a significant breakthrough in the investigation into Lawler's murder. Authorities described the arrest as extremely significant, suspecting the individual from Sligo of playing a crucial role in the homicide. More recently, a 39-year-old man named James Fields has been charged with aiding the offenders in connection with Lawler's killing. He stands accused of knowing about the perpetrators and hindering their capture by assisting them in leaving the area. By now it's clear that Lawler was shot dead in a complex plot involving a range of criminal gangs. At the time of his murder, Lawler had become one of the most erratic criminals operating in Ireland's underworld and was the chief suspect in a number of gangland murders. Gardaí believed that Cornelius Price paid over €100,000 for Lawler's assassination in retaliation for the Mulready Woods murder. According to Garda sources, on Lawler's first day out of jail, he went to Price's family compound in Gormanston, County Meath, armed with a gun to seek revenge. However, he fled when he was spotted by plainclothes detectives in an unmarked patrol car passing by. Subsequently, Lawler targeted the teenager in January 2020 who had mocked him at a gym in Coolock shortly after his release. Gardaí state that Lawler orchestrated the abduction with associates from another local gang involved in the Drogheda drugs feud, namely Paul Crosby and Gerard Cruz. Both Crosby and Cruz are currently incarcerated after pleading guilty to aiding in Mulready Wood's murder. Witness statements indicate that Lawler stabbed Mulready Woods in the neck and watched him die. He then ordered others in the house in Rathmullen Park, Drogheda, to dismember the body. The gruesome murder sparked outrage nationwide and within the criminal underworld. Lawler paid the price for this horrific act when he was murdered several weeks later. Initially, it was believed that it had been Price's cunning plan to set Lawler up with a rival group by feigning a hit job in Belfast. The intended target remained safely hidden while the assassin waited for Lawler to walk into his own execution. This elaborate scheme led to Price celebrating the rival's demise in a chilling selfie video. However, it's the killing of Mr. Big's right-hand man, Kenneth Finn, in Coolock back in 2018 that is currently being treated as the primary motive for Lawler's murder. Arrests, cash seizures, and other activities related to the Dundon McCarthy gang following the fatal shooting are now seen as a smokescreen devised by Mr. Big to conceal his involvement in Lawler's murder. According to sources, Mr. Big is considered Ireland's most cunning criminal. Sligo gang boss Barry Young is also believed by Gardaí to have forged close links to Mr. Big. Robbie Lawler's life was steeped in crime and violence. As a controversial and polarising figure, he was respected but mostly feared in Ireland's underworld. His death concluded a turbulent and violent career, leaving behind a legacy of crime and chaos that still haunts Ireland. As investigations continue, his shadow looms large over the country. Although the mystery of his murder persists, one thing is clear: Robbie Lawler's reign of terror has ended, but his legacy will continue to haunt Ireland for years to come. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.